Hello everyone, we're going to be looking at doing this pig picture in watercolours. I've got my watercolour paper here, ready to rock and roll. I've put a little bit of tape down because I'm only going to be doing bits of colour at a time, so it shouldn't require too much taping down. But if you want to secure it, probably the more the better. I've got my 2B pencil and a rubber and sharpener. First of all, I'm going to get a drawing down of my pigs, and I'm just going to freestyle this for a bit of fun. So it's a quick sketch to get a feeling for it. So you should end up with something kind of like that. Let's just show you if I zoom in. Now once you've got the bare structures down, so you can see I've put the pig in roughly where I think the pigs will go in relationship to that. Then I'm going to start putting down the detail, some lovely little cute tails that are fun to draw. Okay, so fundamentally I've got the splodges on my pig, oh, I've got a bit on the ear, I've got my drawing down, I'm getting it in my head where my shadows are and where my highlights are. Now I'm going to put my masking fluid on. Right everyone, so I've got a brush, some washing up liquid, a palette and some masking fluid to work. The second stage of this project. First of all, if you take your washing up liquid, put your brush in and just work some washing up liquid through the hairs of the brush to protect it from the masking fluid. Then you'll need to take your masking fluid, give it a good shake, check that it's not old and out of date and therefore will wreck your paper. Pour a little of the masking fluid onto your palette. The palette needs to be plastic for this. You also won't need too much. As you can see, I've only poured out a small amount. Check that you always put the lid back on your masking fluid, because if you tip it over it can be a real pain to remove it. Then just double check that you've got the washing up liquid worked thoroughly through the hairs of your brush. Take your brush and start applying it to where you want to keep any highlights. So on here you can see the light is fairly strong in a few areas. It's completely up to you and how well your printout has given you a view of the reference image. Make sure that your masking fluid applied in really quite thick layers or layer. Now you can be very loose and make this more like an illustration, or you can be very fine and accurate. Okay, so that's exactly where I want my masking fluid to go. You can see I've got a little splodge of stain from my washing up liquid. Be careful when handling the washing up liquid, you can see a little bit will stain your watercolour paper. Now take a jam jar of clean water and rinse out your brush. Allow this to dry. It's going to take probably about 5 to 10 minutes. It should be touch dry so that if you put your finger on it, you feel a little bit tacky, but it doesn't come off onto the skin of your finger. Then we'll start with the painting. Right, so we've done the drawing in a 2B pencil. We've then gone in with some masking fluid and covered areas that we're going to keep white. Now what we're going to do is something quite unusual. We're going to mix a neutral tint, then we're going to put in all the areas of shadow and allow that to dry, and then start working light to dark on top of that. The neutral tint will sit underneath the translucent layers of colour and darken areas of shadow. It works very well as a technique within watercolours. take some water and you're looking at first of all making a very strong dark purple. So a crimson red, is mixed in with a ultramarine blue. Then you pick up a cadmium yellow, and as soon as you mix it in you'll start getting a brown, because remember, when all three primaries mix together you'll get brown. Now if you want to take that a little bit darker, which I do, you need to then introduce a little bit more of your ultramarine blue. You have to be very careful when you're introducing this ultramarine blue, because if you do too much it'll start going purpley. You can see there it's starting to just change to a grey tone, and that is our neutral tint. I'm going to take that and I'm going to paint that onto the areas that I'm going to have dark tones built up on top. So such as the spots that you can see on the animals, the shadows underneath on the sand, all those types of areas. Right, so just like that, I've used the neutral tint. I need to allow this to dry. I'll probably give it about 20 minutes. You could blast it with a hairdryer. It depends on how warm your room is, so it may dry a bit quicker than that. But it does need to be dry before you go to the next stage, or you're going to end up with bleeds and problems. So take it easy and be patient. Right, take your brush and a little bit of the crimson red. Crimson's very pinky as red, and dilute with some water to make it quite pink. Then take a little bit of your crimson red again and mix with your ultramarine blue to make a slight lilac-y tone. Okay, so now I'm going to take that very washed out crimson red and start painting in areas of my pig. And this is my light pinky tone. So I can put that in on my pig areas, not worrying about the white highlight. And also I'd recommend working one pig at a time, or this could get very confusing. And then I'd pick up my lilac-y pink and I put that in areas where I want my pink to be a little bit more of a stronger pink. So I'm dabbing that in to the areas of wet paint. Now I'm picking up my light pink, and I might take a little bit of water onto my brush just to dilute the shade a little bit more, making it very fine, and then pick up that stronger pink, and where I've got areas that are a little bit stronger in the pinky tone, see here, just kind of playing around my pinks, making sure I dilute them quite heavily with water. I'm just dabbing in stronger pinks on areas. I've got the highlights that will come in once I remove the blue masking fluid. I've got my shadows I'm going to work over the top of, because I've put that neutral tint down, so that's my core foundation for my shadows. I've now laid down a medium tone of pink as a general gist of the pigs, and I've also added in a little bit of darker shadow of a purple just on areas of the pigs' legs, specifically areas of darker tone where you'll get the shadow. I'm going to use yellow ochre with a little bit of a brown to lay in a bit of sand to set the context of the story that we're telling. Keep your brush marks very loose. Think of the texture that you're trying to represent. If you want to, you could take a little bit of a stronger, darker brown in a few places, and while the paint is wet, work that in, just as we did with areas of shadow on the pig's bum. It'll look a little bit blotchy, and variation of tone will make it more realistic. I'm going to allow that now to all completely dry. Then I'm going to come in, I'm going to look at removing the masking fluid. So it does need to be thoroughly dry, you're going to rip the paper fibres off the surface of the drawing. Then I'm going to come back and work it up to a little bit more of a polish level, but still maintaining that loose, fun, quirky feeling. Right, so I've allowed it all to fundamentally settle. The paper's generally dry. There's a slight dampness in it because I can tell by the surface of the paper, but I reckon it's good enough for me to get this masking fluid off. So I'm taking my finger and I'm just gently rubbing it. Yeah, seems to be okay, it's not breaking up the paper. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I definitely need to go darker on some of the areas of the shadow and build that tone up. And I need to refine some of the shapes because you can see at the moment I'm relying on the pencil line to give the edge of the animals. This means that to build up that darker tone, I'm going to take my neutral tint and add a little bit of black to it just to boost it up. Alright, if I take my crimson red, a little bit of ultramarine blue, make a decent quantity so that I know it hasn't got a huge amount of water dilution. It means it'll be much darker. Then I'm going to add my cadmium yellow. Rebalance my ultramarine blue to make it that grey tone, remember. And then I'm going to add a little bit of black into that. Try to avoid using black on its own. Generally mix it with another colour and make life look more realistic, or make your work look more realistic. Now I'm going to come in and just work the shadows to start off with because they're a little bit darker. And I'm not going to work it evenly, I'm going to have some of that neutral tint come through so that I get a variation in the shadow work. I'm going to put a little bit of the darker shadow over some areas of legs, just to exaggerate the tone of shadow on the bum. So you can see here a little bit of a shadow here and there. I'll exaggerate the contours of the pigs. You can see here I've put in that darker shadow, and because I've kept the baby pigs lighter, it's thrown the mother behind them, giving you a sense of perspective and depth. Right, so while that's drying, I'm going to just take a bit of black, add in a little bit of a cadmium red, make a very dark brown. I'm just going to go around the spots to zap them up, make sure they're nice and prominent on the babies. Okay, so hopefully you've got to that level, and we worked up a few different layers now, and we're just going to then get a very fine brush. I've got a fine brush here, and a little bit of a dark shadow tone. I'm going to add a bit of water so that it's a nice smooth mixture. It's got that red tone sway, and I'm going to start cleaning up some of the detail because it's got a little bit lost. I've got the tails, for instance, that I might want to put in. Okay, you should have something like that. It shows you your pig with your little piglets. Hopefully you've had fun, you've enjoyed some basics, and we're going to move on to the next project soon.